Come on the air with the breaking news about Team Trump's reckless disregard for U.S. national security. According to documents reviewed by the Washington Post, as well as interviews with 3 U.S. officials, White House National Security Advisor Mike Waltz has done it again. He and members of the National Security Council have, quote, conducted government business over personal Gmail accounts, end quote. Washington Post reporting this, quote, a senior Waltz aide used the commercial email service for highly technical conversations with colleagues at other government agencies, including sensitive military positions and powerful weapon systems relating to an ongoing conflict. That is according to emails that were reviewed by the Washington Post. Waltz has had less sensitive but potentially exploitable information sent to his Gmail, such as his schedule and other work documents. The Trump administration is pushing back against the Washington Post report, and a spokesperson for the National Security Council saying that he has not seen Mike Waltz use his Gmail that way, adding, quote, Waltz didn't and wouldn't send classified information on an open account. That is not what the Washington Post reports. It's not the question or even the point. Experts telling the Washington Post that Waltz's use of Gmail makes him an incredibly vulnerable and high-value target for foreign actors, people like spies, saying that Gmail is far less secure than even a messaging app like Signal, which was, as we all know now, used by practically every single member, including the Vice President of the United States, of Donald Trump's top national security apparatus. They use Signal to have very sensitive conversations about an imminent military strike. Wall Street Journal also reported over the weekend that Mike Waltz had multiple other Signal chat groups going, not just about the Houthis, but about Russia and other topics. This breaking news on the use of Gmail to discuss government business by national security officials in the Trump administration is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Justice Department, now an MSNBC legal analyst, Mary McCord is here. With me at the table, New York Times investigative reporter and MSNBC national security contributor Mike Schmidt is here. Also joining us, MSNBC legal analyst and former SDNY Criminal Division Deputy Chief Christy Greenberg is here. Mary McCord, your first thoughts.
Well, we were floored to learn that some of the top national security officials were using Signal to discuss detailed plans about an attack on the Houthis. But Signal, at least, is end-to-end encrypted. It is certainly not an approved communications application for classified information, but it's more secure than Gmail. So it's pretty shocking to see that not only would the carelessness in protecting sensitive information extend not only to using an unsafe and unsecure platform like Signal, but to one that is even less secure and less safe than Gmail. I recognize that there is pushback that anything classified was actually communicated on Gmail, but some of the things that you just described from that Washington Post story do sound very much like things that in my term in government would have been classified. And even if not classified national defense information, like the information that was in the Signal chats about the attack on the Houthis, which put aside for a second that the department or that the government is claiming that was not classified. I don't buy that. But even assuming nothing of that same level of sensitivity was on Gmail, it is not an approved communications platform for government employees doing official government business. And that is not only because of security issues, even things far less secret than our classified national defense information are still sensitive, still something that we don't want adversaries, both foreign and domestic, to be getting a hold of or breaking into. It's also not an approved mechanism for maintaining federal records. I mean, one reason you need to use your government email when you're communicating about official business with other government employees or even with outside government employees is so there would be a record of those emails for purposes of the Federal Records Act. Excuse me. So that's another problem with the use of Gmail here.
So, Mary, I want to ask you to sort of travel back in time when Trump cabinet officials were treated like mere mortals, right? When they were not free from scrutiny by the Department of Justice. And I want to get into Mike Waltz's credibility, because the Washington Post includes this episode about Mike Waltz, because I think we're going to have a furious attack on the reporting, right? And I think that'll be the shiny object. But I just want to put into the record right now, before we go any further, what we've learned about Mike Waltz's credibility in this situation. Here's what he told Fox News, quote, Waltz, who added Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic to the Signal chat, told Fox News, quote, I take full responsibility. I built the group. But he has subsequently said Goldberg's contact information was, quote, sucked into his phone somehow. And he's never met or talked to the journalist, despite a newly circulated photo of the two men near each other at an event at the French ambassador's residence in Washington. Just as how Jeffrey Goldberg, the journalist, responded, quote, he's telling everyone he's never met me or spoken to me. That's simply not true. Goldberg told Meet the Press on Sunday. Quote, this isn't the Matrix. Phone numbers don't just get sucked into other phones. So we'll use the L word here. He's lying. Those are lies. And now there's a new report from the Washington Post, not saying that he sent classified information over his Gmail, but that he and his staff were using Gmail to communicate serious, technical, and detailed government information. I want to come back to a point you seem to make almost in passing, that this violates the Records Act. Just zoom in as though these were normal people in a normal administration where accountability and a Justice Department that was still independent and singularly focused on U.S. national security. What would that look like?
Well, so you would see a couple of things going on here. I mean, the National Archives, for one, outside even in the Department of Justice, would be concerned about using, again, an application that doesn't result in the records being retained under the Federal Records Act. I mean, Congress passed that statute to make sure that all federal records would be maintained so that we have a historical record of things. And it's not just so that they can be FOIA'd under Public, Records Act requests by people to try to gain access to government communications, but for all kinds of purposes that the government needs throughout history to kind of be able to look back institutionally about how did previous administrations approach different things, et cetera. So you would expect the National Archivist to be concerned about that. You would expect the intelligence community, including the FBI and NSA, CIA, ODNI, I'm sorry for the menu here of acronyms, but you would expect our intelligence community to want to drill down on just how sensitive were the communications. Was anything there classified? Do they need to worry about harm to any of our allies, repairing any relationships with allies if potentially things could have been that they shared with us could have been vulnerable to being overheard or deliberately surveilled by our adversaries. They'd want to look into that carefully. Again, what we're seeing here is one newspaper article about what kinds of things those Gmail was used for, but there could be many more things, right? So they would want to look into that. And if in combination with the Signal chats, you would ordinarily think that there would be an investigation to determine whether there should be some sort of criminal or at least civil or administrative liability here. There's a whole sort of hierarchy of penalties for transmitting sensitive information over non-approved means, and that could be losing certain privileges like security clearances, for example, being reassigned to different jobs, other, suspension, other forms of discipline, all the way up to criminal prosecution if, of course, we're talking about the mishandling of classified information or some of these other types of things. So, normally this is something that should be investigated. It might even, honestly, at the point where we're talking about these now multiple examples, be something that inspector generals would want to look at, because they'd want to see, is this a bigger and more systemic problem that needs, to be reported on? Now, we don't have an inspector general for the National Security Advisor, but you do for other departments and agencies that the National Security Advisor communicates with. So I think you would normally see, one passing, use of Gmail for something that's non-substantive, maybe, hey, I'm trying to reach you. When are you going to be around? Are you on vacation? Something like that. Those things would be overlooked. But this sounds like it was used, at least based on this reporting, for much more sort of regular use. And it also makes you wonder, Nicole, why are you using that? I mean, when I was in government, right, I had my personal phone with my personal Gmail, and I had my government issued phone with my government email. Both went with me everywhere, but I did not confuse them, right? When I was doing official business outside of the office and in a, not classified communications, I would use my government email on my government phone. I am certain that Mike Waltz has a government phone, and there's no reason for your personal email to even be on that phone. So it does make you wonder why. It's not like it's easier to use Gmail than your government email, and so why use it at all?